"We're terminating you effective immediately. Security will escort you out," he said without even looking up from his MacBook Pro. Still logged into his first Zoom call of the day. The CEO's son. Day one in the big chair. Me, Chuck Patterson, 55 years old, watching this kid who I'd taught how to read financial statements try to end my career with a script. No handshake, no explanation, just a trembling HR rep standing behind him like she was watching someone defuse a bomb with a butter knife. The ink on his promotion paperwork was still wet, and he was already playing executioner. Bradley Patterson Jr. had his designer haircut perfectly styled, his Stanford MBA diploma freshly framed on the wall, and his disruptor confidence inflated like a balloon at a kid's party. He didn't ask questions. He didn't even blink. Just read the line off his tablet word for word. You could tell someone coached him, probably his father or some expensive consultant or the mirror in his corner office bathroom. I didn't flinch or argue. I stood up, adjusted my jacket, and handed over my badge with the kind of calm you learn after 28 years in logistics and 6 years in the Navy before that. He thought he was firing me. Thought this was his big move to modernize Anchor Point logistics. All I said was, "I want to do this right. Tell your father the board meeting in 3 hours should be interesting." Then I walked out, past the silent HR rep, past the security guard who looked more confused than concerned, past the framed photo of the founding team in the lobby that included me standing right next to Bradley Sr. when we opened our Chicago headquarters back in 1996. And hey, while I've got you here, if this already feels like the kind of corporate chaos that makes your blood boil, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and give it a like. Not because I'm desperate, but because it really helps the team keep digging up these stories and showing what really happens behind those glass doors. You'd be surprised how often the person getting fired is the one holding all the cards. Now back to our regularly scheduled takedown. 3 hours. That's how long Junior had between his first firing and his first legal nightmare. In that time, I imagine he celebrated. Maybe posted something on LinkedIn about tough decisions for digital transformation or streamlining operations for the future. Hell, he probably had the hashtags ready. #leadership, #innovation, next gen, or whatever buzzword his personal brand consultant told him to use. Meanwhile, the board packet had already gone out. Section 12B, titled plainly Emergency Succession Protocol, buried in the original shareholder agreement like a landmine nobody expected to step on. Written by me, reviewed by our legal team, signed by every investor who thought it would never matter. But what happens if leadership goes completely off the rails? The answer? If an executive is terminated without a formal board vote and that termination is initiated by someone with no equity stake, then all interim authority gets suspended immediately. The board has to meet within 4 hours. Voting power goes straight to the majority shareholder, me, because while Junior was probably drafting his victory speech, I was activating that protocol. Dated, signed, time-stamped, and hand-delivered to every board member, investor, and general counsel tied to Anchor Point Logistics. Unlike his termination memo, mine came with a certified return receipt. He thought I'd go quietly. What he didn't know was that I never built my position at this company to be visible. I built it to be bulletproof against people exactly like him. Entitled, impatient, handed authority, like it came with the family name. There's a reason my ownership percentage doesn't appear in the glossy company brochures or on the leadership page of our website. I was the foundation under the building, the backup plan in the filing cabinet, the guy you called when the lawyers were circling and the competition was trying to poach our biggest clients. I never wanted the spotlight. I wanted security, stability, and equity. God, the equity. While they were naming conference rooms after the founders' grandkids and giving out plaques to people who'd been here 18 months, I was taking payment in percentages. Half a point here, a full point there. Stock options instead of bonuses. Voting shares instead of fancy titles. Every time we closed a major deal or brought in a new investor, I negotiated another slice. Quietly, methodically. I didn't play poker. I built the table and printed the cards. It started back when Anchor Point was 3 folding tables, a whiteboard, and Bradley Sr. thinking compliance was something you could handle with a handshake and a smile. He was a visionary, sure. The kind who could see the future of supply chain management but couldn't remember if we'd paid the electric bill or accidentally sent $50,000 to the wrong vendor. I stepped in, organized everything, stabilized our operations, and secured our contracts. For my trouble, he offered me a VP title and a corner office. I declined. Asked for equity instead. "You'd rather own the foundation than sit in the penthouse," he joked. "Exactly," I said. By year 7, I was sitting on 18%. By year 15, 35%. The CFO left in a screaming match over budget allocations. I picked up his 15% at a steep discount. He needed cash fast. Divorce lawyers don't work for free. When Bradley Sr.'s brother tried to sue us for patent infringement and failed spectacularly, he wanted to settle privately. I took his remaining 22% stake in exchange for a bulletproof NDA and his promise to never contact our clients again. 72%. That's where I landed quietly. No fanfare, no press releases, just majority ownership filed properly with the Delaware Secretary of State. Nestled inside that ownership was Section 12B, a clause nobody bothered to read because we'd never needed it. The section said that if a non-equity executive ever terminated a founding team member without board approval, all executive powers would be suspended pending shareholder review. I wrote it after Junior's cousin tried to fire half our warehouse staff during a budget tantrum 13 years ago. That was the last time anyone touched authority they hadn't earned. Until today. Because what Bradley Jr. didn't understand, what they don't teach you in business school, is that inheriting a title doesn't mean inheriting control. Control isn't gifted. It's not on your business card or your office nameplate. It's in the contracts, in the fine print, in the protocols written during late-night calls with paranoid investors who wanted to know what would happen if someone's unqualified kid got promoted to CEO. Turns out it activates exactly like this. One arrogant termination, no board vote, no cause, no process. Just a 29-year-old with fresh veneers and a new email signature strutting into my office like he was directing a corporate takeover movie. He had no clue that by reading that script, he'd triggered a legal trapdoor that had been waiting 13 years for someone stupid enough to step on it. Now Section 12B was live. I didn't just send the activation notice, I sent a complete legal package. Shareholder statements, equity breakdown, archived email approvals, timestamped documentation, notarized copies, even included his termination memo with its grammatical errors and HR signature. They'd be talking about that one for years. Because while he was figuring out how to access the executive parking garage and get his security clearance upgraded, the board was reading a memo titled Immediate Suspension of Executive Authority, Section 12B Protocol. He was about to learn what real authority looked like. And Bradley Sr. had no idea his legacy heir had just stepped on a landmine with the family name engraved on the trigger. But that call was coming, and nobody would be laughing. Somewhere on the 12th floor, in a glass-walled office he hadn't earned and didn't understand, Bradley Patterson Jr. was probably celebrating. The kind of celebration you have when you think you just solved your biggest problem instead of creating your worst nightmare. First day, first major decision, he probably texted someone. Time to modernize this place. He kicked back in the leather chair, opened his laptop, and started drafting a company-wide email about exciting changes and strategic restructuring. Something about embracing digital transformation and eliminating outdated thinking. He paused halfway through typing. Leadership requires making tough calls for long-term vision, completely unaware he was about to lose both leadership and vision. Meanwhile, downstairs in legal, the board members were opening a very different kind of package. One sealed in a priority mail envelope stamped confidential, Section 12B activation. The courier had arrived 25 minutes earlier, handed the packets to executive assistants like they were subpoenas, and left, without conversation. Inside that packet was a 2-inch thick stack of legal documentation. Cover page, Section 12B, activation, shareholder transition proposal, subheading, request for emergency board meeting under bylaw 8.4. Attached was the signed trigger letter dated that morning, time-stamped at 6:47 a.m., hours before I was terminated. Following it, complete equity breakdown showing every share I'd acquired over 28 years, every transaction, every board-approved agreement, a full portfolio ledger with notarizations and verified state filings. The reaction wasn't instant, it was worse. It was slow. That creeping realization when you understand you're not just in trouble, you're in litigation territory, and you didn't even see it coming. By the time Bradley Sr.'s general counsel skimmed the clause and hit the key phrase, suspension of executive authority upon unilateral termination by non-equity appointee, he actually said out loud, "Oh no." Then again, quieter, "Oh no." The packet also included a meeting mandate. The board was legally required to convene within 4 hours. That timer had already started ticking. I made sure of that. I didn't need to be in the building. The law was there, the contracts were there, the documentation was airtight. By the time Junior's celebratory Instagram story hit champagne on deck, first move made with a boomerang of clinking glasses, his name was already flagged by corporate filing systems as the sole initiator of a termination he had no authority to make. Meanwhile, across the city and in 2 time zones, the board members were canceling lunch meetings, skipping golf tournaments, and calling their assistants to clear afternoon schedules. They weren't happy. They were trapped. Because once Section 12B activates, it's not about office politics anymore. It's about fiduciary duty, voting rights, SEC compliance, personal liability. Their names were on filings they hadn't reviewed in years. This wasn't some family spat. This was a legally binding reversion of corporate control. And there in black and white was the number they hadn't thought about in years: 72% majority shareholder voting control. Emergency recall of all executive appointments made in the previous 48 hours. Immediate suspension of non-board sanctioned authority. My authority reinstated the moment his was voided. The best part? The clause wasn't just enforceable, it was irreversible once filed. That detail had been added during an investor scare 8 years ago. They wanted assurance that if someone went rogue, they couldn't undo the emergency meeting with a panicked apology and a retracted memo. There was no take-back button. So while he strutted through headquarters with his corporate transformation checklist, trying to figure out how to access the financial dashboards, boardroom chairs were already being arranged. Bradley Sr. hadn't arrived yet, but his phone had buzzed 6 times in the last hour. The first 5 calls he ignored. Golf was sacred time at the Meadowbrook Country Club. But the 6th ring was persistent, sharp, from his general counsel's direct line. He answered with his usual grunt, cigar still clenched between his teeth. "This better be urgent, Morrison." What followed wasn't urgent, it was catastrophic. "I need you at headquarters immediately," the voice said, strained and professional. "Your son signed something this morning. We have a situation." "What kind of situation?" Bradley Sr. asked, already walking toward the clubhouse. "The kind that requires emergency legal counsel and a board meeting in 2 hours. Click. He didn't finish his round. Didn't say goodbye to his playing partners, just threw his clubs in the cart and made it back to downtown Chicago in record time, still wearing his golf cleats and polo shirt. When he arrived, legal was waiting in the lobby. So was our CFO, 2 board members, and a conference room where nobody was making small talk anymore. The general counsel didn't waste time with pleasantries, just opened his briefcase, pulled out a copy of the packet, and read in a flat professional tone, "Per Section 12B of the amended shareholder agreement, any executive termination carried out by a non-equity appointee without prior board vote shall result in immediate revocation of all interim leadership authority and automatic reversion of executive control to the majority shareholder pending emergency review." Bradley Sr. went completely still. He stared like the words were in a foreign language. Then his face went pale, and he asked the question everyone was dreading: who authorized the termination of Chuck Patterson? Nobody answered. The room felt like a morgue. He asked again, louder this time, more desperate. "Who the hell signed off on firing Chuck Patterson?" The CFO cleared his throat, eyes darting to the HR director who looked like she might throw up on her tablet. Finally, the general counsel responded, flat and unforgiving: "Your son. Alone. Without board consultation or shareholder approval." The silence in that room was surgical. Bradley Sr. blinked once, slowly, then again, the color draining from his face like someone had unplugged a vital machine. He doesn't have sign-off authority for terminations," he said, as if saying it could somehow rewind the clock. "No," the attorney confirmed, adjusting his glasses. "He doesn't. He was appointed CEO by board resolution, but he holds 0 equity. His authority is entirely derivative, which means under Section 12B, his unilateral termination of a founding team member is invalid and triggers immediate succession protocol." Bradley Sr. ran both hands through his silver hair, pacing now, muttering under his breath. Then louder, This is a misunderstanding. I'll talk to him. We'll retract the termination. The lawyer didn't let him finish. There is no retracting this. The protocol is active. Paperwork was filed before the termination was executed, time-stamped, notarized, and distributed to all stakeholders. You have exactly 2 hours before the emergency meeting begins. But he's my son, Bradley Sr. tried, voice breaking slightly. He's not a shareholding member of this board, the attorney cut him off. And right now, he's sitting in the executive suite planning a company restructure he has no legal authority to implement. Bradley Sr. sat down hard, like the chair had been pulled out from under him. His hands were shaking. No longer the confident founder of a $450 million logistics empire, just an aging businessman who realized he'd handed live ammunition to someone who thought the safety was decorative. "What happens now?" he asked, voice barely audible. The general counsel closed his briefcase. "You sit in that conference room. You listen. You do not interrupt. And when Chuck Patterson walks in, because he will walk in, you remember that he controls 72% of this company and has every legal right to restructure leadership as he sees fit." "God help us all," Bradley Sr. said, mostly to himself. As he stood slowly, painfully, you could see the reality hit him like a physical blow. He never gave me power. I'd taken it, one carefully negotiated contract at a time, over 28 years of building something he thought belonged to his family name. At exactly 2:58 p.m., I walked back into Anchor Point Logistics. Same building, same marble lobby with the company timeline etched into the wall, but everything had changed. The security guard who'd escorted me out 3 hours earlier now nodded respectfully and held the elevator door. The receptionist, who'd avoided eye contact during my termination walk, now smiled genuinely and said, "Conference room A, Mr. Patterson. They're all waiting for you." I took the elevator to the 12th floor, walked past Junior's corner office where he was frantically making phone calls, probably to his Stanford classmates asking how to pivot out of a hostile takeover, and opened the conference room door at exactly 3:00 p.m. Every board member was there. 8 faces, some pale, some resigned, all understanding they were about to witness a corporate execution. Bradley Sr. sat at the far end, looking like he'd aged a decade in the last hour. His golf shirt was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled. The man who'd built a logistics empire from nothing now looked like someone who'd just realized he'd accidentally handed the keys to a stranger. I didn't sit down immediately. I opened my briefcase with the same calm precision I'd learned in the Navy, placed a single document on the polished conference table, and spoke clearly to the room. As majority shareholder of Anchor Point Logistics, I formally request a binding vote to rescind all executive appointments made in the previous 48 hours, pending comprehensive shareholder review. The words hit the room like a gavel. No one moved at first, just silence, the kind you get when everyone knows they're watching history unfold. The board chair, Harold Weinstein, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. Motion received and logged. Emergency session is now in order under Section 12B protocols. I finally sat down, not in a guest chair, not in some corner spot, but in my chair, the one at the head of the table that I'd earned through 28 years of keeping this company profitable while others played with org charts and mission statements. The nameplate in front of me read Charles Patterson, majority shareholder. Someone had prepared that fast. Bradley Jr. burst through the door exactly 5 minutes later, face flushed red, still holding his iPhone like it was a lifeline. What's going on? Why wasn't I informed about this meeting? I'm the CEO. I looked at him directly for the first time all day. Really looked at him. This kid who I'd taught how to read P&L statements, who'd sat in my office asking questions about freight coordination, who'd called me Uncle Chuck until he got his MBA. "Because you don't have the authority to call emergency board meetings," I said calmly. "You never did." That's when it hit him. Really hit him. The termination he'd been so proud of, the power move he thought would define his leadership legacy, had triggered the one thing that could remove him completely. He'd fired the majority shareholder of his own company. The color drained from his face like someone had pulled a plug. But I'm the CEO. "The board appointed me," he stammered, looking around the room for support that wasn't coming. Harold Weinstein spoke up, his voice gentle but firm. Bradley, your appointment was conditional and derivative. You hold no equity stake, which means under our corporate bylaws, specifically Section 12B, your unilateral termination of a founding member triggered this review. This is ridiculous, Junior said, his voice getting higher. Chuck, you can't seriously want to destroy everything my father built. I leaned back in my chair. Your father didn't build this alone. He built it with partners. I'm one of those partners, and partners don't get fired by their junior employees. The vote was called. Harold asked for all in favor of rescinding Bradley Patterson Jr.'s executive appointment. One by one, hands went up around the table. The CFO, the head of operations, the lead investor representative. Even Bradley Sr., after a long pause that seemed to last forever, slowly raised his hand. 8-0, unanimous. Junior looked like someone had slapped him. Dad? Bradley Sr. couldn't meet his son's eyes. I'm sorry, son, but this is bigger than family. This is about the company surviving. The motion passes, Harold announced. Bradley Patterson Jr.'s appointment as Chief Executive Officer is hereby rescinded, effective immediately. Junior stood there for another 30 seconds, probably thinking someone would change their mind. Someone would stand up for nepotism over competence. When nobody moved, he finally turned and walked toward the door. At the threshold, he stopped and looked back at me. This isn't over, he said, trying to sound threatening. Yes, it is, I replied. And it was. By 4:30 p.m., I was back in my office. Not a new office, not some consolation prize corner space, but my original office, the one I'd occupied for 15 years before they moved me to make room for Junior's innovation lab and foosball table. The nameplate was already back on the door, Charles Patterson, Chairman and CEO. Junior was escorted out the same way I had been earlier, except his exit was permanent. No 3-hour turnaround, no secret protocols to activate, just security walking him to his BMW, which he'd parked in the founder's reserved spot that morning. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Bradley Sr. stayed on as president, reporting to me now instead of the other way around. He understood the new structure. I'd saved his company from his son's inexperience, and we both knew it. During our private conversation afterward, he actually thanked me. I let family cloud my business judgment, he admitted. Junior wasn't ready. Maybe he never would have been. The next morning, there was no dramatic announcement, no company-wide email about regime change, no speeches about new leadership. Just business as usual, except now the person running Anchor Point Logistics was the person who'd actually been running it all along. I'd just made it official. Our drivers kept their routes. Our warehouse staff kept their jobs. Our clients kept getting their shipments on time. The only thing that changed was that decisions were being made by someone with 28 years of logistics experience instead of someone with 28 days of MBA theory. Sometimes power isn't loud or flashy. It's patient, strategic, and impossible to fire. Sometimes the person you underestimate is the person who built the very ground you're standing on. And sometimes, when entitled leadership finally meets earned authority, justice is served quietly, legally, and permanently. Subscribe if you want more stories about what really happens when corporate nepotism crashes into corporate reality. Trust me, you'd be surprised how often this plays out in America's boardrooms.